The real test of learning is to be able to explain what you've learned in your own terms and be able to apply it to new situations. Traditional courses that rely heavily on passive memorization may deny students an opportunity to develop that level of understanding. A group of faculty members at Harvard University has begun experimenting with techniques to enhance learning in their courses. The subjects they teach vary: physics, astronomy, and chemistry. The settings range from large lectures to small sections. Each situation requires its own solution, but the basic idea, called collaborative learning or peer instruction, tries to involve the students themselves in the process of teaching.
2+. When you learn to teach a subject, when you're just struggling with how to present it, where you're sort of relearning it yourself, that's when students gain the most in a lecture. Once you've really got it down and you see all these beautiful connections that you didn't see before, you're well beyond the level of the student. And the lucidity, the flow, the beauty is something that the students cannot recreate for you. They're not at that level. And that's why I think some students, after they leave a wonderfully lucid lecture, can't recall what was going on a half an hour later.
I keep being surprised by how difficult certain very fundamental concepts can be. In fact, I noticed that for us teachers, some of these very fundamental concepts are second nature. They're so second nature that we cannot explain them very well anymore. They're obvious. They are clear without any words.
When I was taking science here at Harvard, it was awfully intimidating at times, and it was just lonely. You're sort of in your own world. I didn't know the student's name to me to my left. I didn't know the student's name to me to my right. And that's really disconcerting. And it's no wonder that students will major in the humanities when you sit at a round table and you discuss a book, and people laugh and joke, and it's just so much more relaxed.
How do you improve student learning in a large lecture course? For Professor Eric Mazur, it was important to find ways to increase understanding of basic concepts.
Let's make sure that we understand this fully. First of all, many mistakes that I'd seen over the course of the years that to me seemed bizarre, all of a sudden fell into place. They became mistakes that I understood. They were a result of lack of fundamental understanding. How do you describe fluids? And at that point, I started to introduce a technique which I've come to call peer instruction, which one could also call cooperative learning. Most of the lecture time I use to actually teach the same material I would do normally, except that every so often, every 15 or so minutes, I interrupt the lecture and place on the overhead projector a question. Imagine a very big bathtub. You can also, if you don't like imagining very big bathtubs, you can imagine a dry dock. And there's a huge battleship in this dry dock. Now, on the walls of this question is a multiple choice question. It is very simple, and it never involves any calculation. It really tests whether the students understand one single basic concept. I give the students about 60 seconds to think about this question. In front of them, they have a scanning form on which they can mark their answer, their choice, 1, 2, 3, and so on, as well as their level of confidence in this answer. Okay, take a minute to convince your neighbor of your answer. I ask the class, I ask each student actually, to explain his reasoning to any neighboring students. And what happens is striking.
I'm really not too clear.
You always get the entire class, all 200 and some students, talk to one another in a very animated discussion. After these 60 seconds pass, I ask them to mark a revised answer and a revised confidence interval.
The 60 seconds of discussion has had a major impact on the students' understanding of the concept. The graph shows a dramatic increase in the percentage of correct answers and in the students' confidence level.
And let's take a poll. How many of you on the second try chose choice 1? Okay, about 10%. Spill over, 2. 5%, stay exactly brim full. Must be the balance. That's the correct answer.
The results of this technique are impressive.
First of all, there's a much higher attendance in class. Secondly, the students are much more alert than I've ever seen them before. And it's hard not to be alert if you're more or less drawn into the lecture by your fellow students. And thirdly, as the data shows, there is a major, but really major improvement in understanding of the concept.
Learning is a two-way process, and if the students don't get involved, then we're not going to retain anything. And by saying, okay, you're on the spot, you have to do this, then you start thinking. You're actually thinking while you're learning, and that's the way education's supposed to be.
Instead of looking at an equation on a board presented by a professor in lecture and then presented again by a TF, which again is just sort of two presentations of the same inert equation on the board, I get to grapple with it. I get to say, well, I don't understand that. I'm not sure exactly what that means with an intuitive sense.
You know, you see things in a different light. You don't always see them in your light the way you'd study it. You may see the way someone else does it. And that'll help you to understand the whole thing better.
A student who understands it better than I can will be able to work with me, and finally I'll get a feel for it. I'll understand it in my own terms, and when you understand anything in your own terms, I think almost by definition you're going to retain it a lot better.
We can explain it in the terms that we could understand it, which is probably much more useful to a student than the terms that a professor understands something.
So our distance from the geographic position gets smaller.
Philip Sadler's astronomy course in celestial navigation relies to an even greater degree on students teaching each other.
Yeah, you're 180 nautical miles from the North Pole.
No, more.
1,800.
1,800. Yeah. Which is what it is.
So how does the 30 figure in there?
Because that's the zenith distance. Yeah. So that's the distance you're away from its geographic position.
Right here, so it says 60 degrees.
Oh, that's right. No, I thought they meant.
I remember sitting in a lecture hall at MIT in a physics lecture and vowing that if I ever got a chance to teach a class, I would never lecture. So what would that say about this fix over here?
It's wrong.
So when I ended up teaching here, then I began to teach in a very different way, which was much more participatory. Kids get to talk a lot. I get to interact with students. And I think a lot more learning takes place. When I walk around between the tables and talk to the groups, I'm looking for questions that they may have. And if things are going really well, I may decide to throw a little barrier in there, a little roadblock in there, ask them a question which might slow them down a little bit, but which might be very useful for them to pursue. You know, well, I mean, that's for the geographic position. What happens when you have the string? So I can sort of adjust the speed at which these various groups work by putting in some tougher questions into the ones that are moving fast, or help answer questions in the groups that are moving a little more slowly.
He answers questions with questions a lot, but that makes you think about what you're doing. It's not this instant gratification answer.
I get them a little closer to the solution, but I don't solve the problem for them. If they're interested enough to ask a question, they're probably going to benefit from thinking out the answer.
I have really poor spatial relations skills, but if someone can show me with their hands what's going on, then I can say, oh yeah, and then I can model whatever the problem is myself and hopefully internalize it so I can do it in my head.
If you can turn your body into a computer for solving a problem, then that's less symbolic manipulation that you have to do to have some feel for the problem.
Sadler's belief in this method is based on evidence gathered from his students.
At the end of every course, the students get to evaluate the course down to the finest detail. They evaluate which activities they like the best, which they like the least, which field trips they like the most, which they like the least, and so on. And there, at the end of the class, when I compile all that, that sets my agenda for improving the course. It's not the stuff that I think I would like to work on. It's the stuff that the students have difficulty with, that they would like improved, that I put my development efforts in on. When students leave the course, they feel like they can actually teach this subject. So they become very confident in it. Also, it's just a lot of fun.
Jim Davis's teaching fellows in introductory chemistry coordinate their teaching strategies and get individual guidance at their weekly meeting.
I can't imagine operating a course without meeting my teaching fellows on a weekly basis. So it's a good idea, in my opinion, for you to try different things, but then go with what seems to work with you and your section.
I actually had some doubts about how well it was going to work with a review section.
Eric Chahab learned about collaborative teaching from Phil Sadler's astronomy class and is applying it enthusiastically in his chem section.
You can work now with anyone you'd like to, okay? Rearrange the room so your groups are facing each other, and we'll get started on this. You can arrange the room so that groups of 3 are facing one another. You hand out these section sets. They put their names down on it and the names of their partners, and that's important because I see your face, I write your name, and the connection's there. Once everyone's really comfortable with it, once they find out who they like to work with and who they don't like to work with, then I'll just let them go on their own and choose their partners as they wish.
So the ones close to the nucleus are harder to pull off because of the attraction?
Right, they're close in.
Okay.
Can we do this, like...
You want to just try it with this equation
Just one.
over here? Oh, no.
Oh, you don't have one?
I don't think that's what we're looking for, though.
So now we got to do the algebra.
You're still working out each problem on your own, but the difference is you're pooling what you've learned together. Each person can advance really at their own pace while drawing on the resources of other people.
So you better add 8 pluses to make them 2 plus on both sides.
It's the overall charge of the side where the permanganate ion's got a -1 charge, and then on that side too, you're throwing 5 electrons.
Okay,
so you get like
I screwed up on the test.
In order for this technique to work, this group problem-solving technique, I think the students have to be receptive to it, and also they have to be reasonably well prepared. If a student comes in cold, expecting just to sit in the back and watch the teaching fellow work at the board, that's not going to work well. So we have to stress to our students that they need to be prepared when they come to section.
So far away that there's no interaction, okay?
But if there's someone who isn't prepared, what usually happens is we go over the problem step by step so that person can understand exactly what's happening, because you don't want them to feel left out. But I think they sort of feel embarrassed a little bit.
I think that by introducing material, bringing up the difficulty level little by little as we go, and encouraging people, think about this, you really can do it. I know there are students who have gotten through my courses who might have been tempted to drop out, but who have stayed with it and then hit their stride and begun to blossom. I can point to any number of MDs now from classes 10 years ago.
It's important to let the students know that it's okay to be wrong, and I think a key to that is creating an atmosphere that's really relaxed, is fun.
I wonder if it always works.
It's got to, otherwise you know you did something wrong, but I don't really understand why.
Yeah, it just kind of happens.
And you were right, your oxidation numbers did go from +3 to +4, but you had 2 carbons, and so you need 2 electrons to be kicked out.
So it truly doesn't matter which way you do it, but this way is a little more rigorous.
So now what are you going to do?
So then we use this formula and we find the change in entropy for the 54 grams of water, and then the change in entropy of...
He acts as the sort of answerer of last resort if none of us can get it. It is always helpful to have somebody who really knows the answer and how to do the problem within earshot.
At the beginning of the course, I don't know how good some of these students are, and so what I'll do is I'll go from group to group, spending about equal times with each one. As the semester progresses, I can see who needs some help, who doesn't need as much help, and I can give that help to the students who really need it. The students who want to be challenged with the material, want to go beyond what's taught in lecture, I can engage in conversations with them. I can present a scenario that they have to deal with that's beyond the course material.
It's because this has 2 S's in a shell, so this completes this shell, and this has 1 P.
How come it says so? It increases as you go across the period.
Because here you've got the 2 S's to make
A complete shell.
Okay.
And now you're adding on.
I think this technique works best for students in the middle. The very weakest students often have trouble because they don't know what to do at all. And the very best students would like to spend more time working on the fine points because they've already understood the fundamentals that most everybody else needs help on.
And I think the key factor for me is just the level of the other people in your particular group. I know that I want to learn things that I don't understand. And I find it not as useful for me if I spend most of my time explaining much more basic concepts to somebody else. I mean, I don't mean to sound hard-hearted about it, but you know, I need to learn stuff for me as well.
So we have a +1 charge, okay? And so you have...
In Eric's chemistry section,
So
students
it's the
are
same as
challenged to
hydrogen
help
in
one
terms
another
of,
to master the material.
So does that explanation make sense? You need to look at what the effective nuclear charge is.
It's often when you go to explain something to someone
what
because
is
you think
N?
you've understood it that you realize that
that make
in
sense?
fact you're missing one of the points. By actively working it through with other students and discussing it, it gave you the opportunity to really
Okay, so now you have
test each other, to correct each other, to explain things to each other, because Eric would be sort of floating around the classroom and your goal was really to try to do it on your own.
People who I taught this summer, I'll still see around, and it's funny to see how they've made friends, and they stay together as friends, and I see them working on problems in their new course together.
It's a sort of antidote to the traditional undergraduate cutthroat pre-med syndrome.
I think interactive learning can work in all courses. I think it's something that all professors should try to incorporate into lectures, into sections, in all sorts of teaching, because you realize that you are doing the thinking. There is an aha kind of sensation that I figured it out. It's not that someone just told it to me. I actually figured it out. And because I could figure it out now, that means I can figure it out on the exam. I can figure it out for the rest of my life. It's the idea that I've done it and I haven't just been told. It's not passive, it's active learning.